Ladies and gentlemen, across Africa and beyond, this one is for the visionaries, the builders, the change makers. Welcome to the Funding Forum.
From Lagos to Nairobi, Accra to Kigali, we together to unlock destiny. No more guessing, we got the key. The further fund, they show the strategy. Grants, donations, corporate giving. Everything we need, we go start winning. Proposal came, now we did deliver. Because we understand the funding formula.
My name is Ayooluwa Femi, Aribisala, and I'll be your host for today's session. All right, so it's such a pleasure to to have you here with us from wherever you are connecting across the globe. Let me quickly tell you who we are. I promise this part will help everything else make sense. All right. So the further fame, we end the further fame. Last week I heard somebody saying further. Actually, it's not further. It's also the same way we call further, taking you further. So the further firm is a management consultancy firm that exists to strengthen, the Africa's development ecosystem. So what does that mean? It means that we support African-led non-profit, social enterprises, and development institutions, to grow stronger, structurally, financially, and strategically. Very important. So we do this through resource mobilization support, institutional strengthening, and program design. All right, we're not just here to train. All right, we are here to work with organizations through their journey of growth and impact. We'd love to be there with you, all right, to support you as you grow, as you develop. And the funding formula, of course, is one of the ways we are living that mission. So talking about the funding formula is not just a webinar series. All right, it's a response. Over the years, we have seen too many great African organizations with bold visions and real impact struggle to access the right kind of funding. All right. So not because they're not doing their work, okay, but because they haven't been equipped with the tools, the strategies, or even the language to confidently raise resources. So this 4-part training is our contribution to changing that narrative. It's free, it's practical, all right, and it's focused on real life fundraising realities on this continent, the African continent. So this is for Africans by Africans, all right? So we've got over 900 participants from across Africa and beyond who registered for this event, and we are so proud to be building this movement with all of you. Now, for today's session, we're about to dive into understanding the funding landscape, and leading us through that conversation is none other than Dr. Elisabeth. But before she comes on, we'll also be playing a short video introduction. So sit back, watch closely. The next voice you will hear will be hers. All right.
Elisabeth is the project director for the Nigeria Youth Future Fund at Leap Africa. She is deeply committed to driving positive social change and development, and believes this should be done through an inclusive and sustainable approach. She is enthusiastic about ensuring that policy decision-making is evidence-based and the robust involvement of all stakeholders in governance. Elisabeth brings a wealth of experience, knowledge and skills in communications and project management in Nigeria's international development and humanitarian space, all of which she has brought to bear in diverse thematic areas, including advocacy, agricultural policy, energy, gender and youth mainstreaming, migration, open governance, and private sector development. Elisabeth has a PhD with a specialization in development communication from Babcock University, with a thesis that examined the role of news and social media in framing female political leadership in Nigeria's general elections in 2023. She is also a certified project management professional, PMP, and a member of the Project Management Institute, PMI, and the Association of Media and Communication Researchers of Nigeria, AMPRON. In addition, she is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Administration. Please welcome Elisabeth as she takes us through the second module of the Funding Formula 1.0.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you're from. I saw someone say hello all the way from Malaysia. It's great to be with you guys. I really, I'm looking forward to the opportunity to just, share some of my experience, some of the insights I've gotten, when it deals with topics like what we're looking at today. My sincere hope is that by the time you guys are done with this, by the time we're done with this, we all have a better, stronger, clearer understanding of the funding landscape, the opportunities that exist for those of us here in Africa, and maybe being able to also take away just a clearer sense of where we can improve, how we how we approach funding, our thinking around funding, our relationship with funders, amongst other things. So just give me a moment. I'm going to share my screen and share. I mean, there's a presentation I've prepared, and I think it will be easier for all of us if we, there we go. There it is. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I'm supposed to take us. I will be taking us on a module that looks at understanding the funding landscape. And my task this afternoon, this evening, this morning, is to provide an overview of what the funding ecosystem looks like for us in the African context. We'll also try and get a bit of understanding about the types of donors that exist, right? So donors are not a monolithic group. There are different categories of them, but again, we'll talk about that more in a moment. We'll also look at the grant-making process. Again, for some of us, this isn't going to be entirely new. For some of us, it may well be. But yeah, we will look at the grant-making process. And then next, we'll start looking a bit into what donor priorities and criteria are. So why is it that some, applications are successful? Why is it that, some are not, right? And then we will lastly look at trends, challenges, and opportunities that exist. And then there will be opportunity for questions, discussions afterwards. So yeah, I mean, that more or less is what we're looking to do today. So in terms of the funding ecosystem, and I'm looking at it in terms of youth development and for social enterprises. And again, let me not assume that we all know what I mean when I refer to social enterprises. Social enterprises are a type of non-governmental organization, right? Traditionally, when we used to think NGOs, we used to think of nonprofits, right? So these would be organizations that are set up. They can't make money off of the services that they provide. They can't charge for those services. And so typically what used to happen would be that, NGOs, and specifically now speaking about nonprofits, would tend to rely on grant funding. Now, we've started to see on the continent, for those of us in Nigeria, interestingly, I think I was doing a bit of research on this and discovered that we have as many as 400,000 registered social enterprises, right? These are organizations, these are corporate bodies, and I use the word corporate deliberately. They are registered organizations that are engaged in, doing good, right? They do work that has social impact, positive impact, but they do it in a manner that, they still make profit, right? They can charge for their services. It's part of their revenue model. And so they don't necessarily have to rely on just grants, right? But that said, it still doesn't mean that for the most part, grant funding, isn't part of the funding model. But again, I think the most important thing before I start speaking to some of these in detail is that I'm trying to get us to take on that mindset where, and this has been, a shift in how development generally has been viewed and approached on a global level, where, some of us will be, I'm sure I've been hearing things like, Africa in particular, we don't need aid, we need investment. And that sort of thinking has also found its way into, approaches to development. So the idea that, organizations that do good, whether it's civil society organizations, community-based organizations, charities, necessarily need to sit down and, give us money because it's nice. Doesn't cut it anymore. Now, the idea is, invest in what we're doing because there's value that we're adding, right? We may not necessarily, our returns on investment would not be the same ones as in a private sector or commercial environment where you're looking at money in terms of profit, but it's value anyway, right? And the return on investment is social impact. It's jobs created. It's, if you're working on health issues or trying to solve problems around climate smart agriculture, it's the extent to which we're able to make, gains in those areas. But again, it's that thing of there needs to be a mindset shift, right? So having said that, now I can now begin to speak, directly to the slide. For everyone, obviously, we tend to think mainly of two actors, right? We think of our funders. We think of the organizations that provide us with money, right, to do our work. Government agencies. So here you're thinking of, the former USAID, because there's no longer USAID, but then you consider organizations like GIZ, you consider funding from, a lot of governments, the US government inclusive, actually, despite the fact that they scrapped USAID, still provide funds, for carrying out development projects and for doing work that, produces social impact. We have our philanthropic foundations, right? So think of your Ford Foundation, the, MasterCard Foundation. Think about MacArthur Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation. So we have the Gates Foundation, right? We have individuals, private individuals who've made a ton of money. Here in Nigeria, think Dangote. There's a Dangote Foundation. There's a T.Y. Danjuma Foundation. So we're thinking about individuals who are, who through their work in private sector have made a ton load of money, right? And who have decided that, we're going to take some of that money and we're going to give back to society. Some people will call it CSR. To some extent it is, but in this case, it's the individuals. It's not necessarily companies now that are doing this. And I think that's the distinction between the two. Then we talk of impact investors, right? So there are a group of investors who simply are not looking at, okay, where do I invest, my money and I make a whole ton in terms of profit. They are specifically targeting startups, organizations, maybe not necessarily startups, companies in the first 1 to sort of 5 years of operating, but they are looking for organizations that are looking to do work and produce value, social value and social impact. And believe it or not, there are these sort of investors, and they exist as associations in certainly in Nigeria. We have a national philanthropy fund or forum, and I know across the continent there are a number of these. The AVPA is one. There's the African Philanthropists forum as well. Development finance institutions. Here we're thinking about our African Development Bank, the World Bank. At country level, I'll use the Nigerian example, but I'm sure in other countries they have similar organizations that have sovereign wealth funds or that are development banks. We have the Bank of Industry in Nigeria, for instance, the Bank of Agriculture, NICERL. There are all these institutions that have funding that's supposed to help develop, that will be investments for social impact. Countries have development targets, development agenda, and it's supposed to be a win-win where you're investing in private or even non-governmental organizations that can help achieve those targets. And then we last but not least, I hope you guys can see this. You have grant makers who specifically target, youth-focused organizations, individuals. I mean, NYFF, for instance, that's what we do, right? I mean, we are an initiative, a joint venture, as it were, with seed funding from a few of the philanthropic foundations. But yeah, we do exist for that sort of reason, to support young individuals or organizations in the youth ecosystem, particularly as it pertains to civic engagement and governance. And then, of course, we have our recipients on the other end. That one I'm not going to explain. But what I do want us to take note of are the three other groups that I mentioned, I've put on the slide here. So there are intermediaries. Most times folks forget this stuff. You have your crowdfunding platforms, for instance, right? These guys are part of the ecosystem. So some organizations or individuals might decide that they're going to bypass intermediaries. So your crowdfunding platforms, fund managers, there are certain organizations or players who are accelerators and incubators, right? So here you think about the guys who, who exist really just to deal with startups, give you space to work, give you, a little bit of funding just for the initial work that you need to do. And then, of course, advisory and legal services. As you are registering your company, as you're trying to figure out how to comply, drawing up agreements, there are all these other players, which again now comes to here we start looking at our enablers and support structures. So policy makers, certainly, academic institutions, the media, the tech platforms that we use that allow us to do the work we need to do. A lot of us may not be aware, although I suspect quite a number of us may be aware, that a lot of these tech companies have special packages, even pricing structures available for non-governmental organizations. So, you don't have to pay taxes for certain things. You don't have to pay as much, for certain things as well. And then, of course, we now have our monitoring and evaluating bodies, the think tanks, the guys who do impact assessments, auditors who come and check your books, and research institutions. So as we think about the development space and the ecosystem, the funders are one set of actor, and certainly important because they bring the money that we can use to do the stuff we want to do, and the stuff that is valuable for us to do. But then there are other players in that space, and it's important we don't forget them, because I know we're talking about funding, but we shouldn't forget the aspects of partnerships. And again, I will speak to that a lot later in my presentation. So now let's talk about donor types. Already I mentioned some of them, but again, this is me now trying to categorize so that we understand how these guys operate, where there may be opportunities, and what the limits are, right? So a GIZ is a bilateral, type of donor. These ones you can approach directly. In fact, more often than not, they will put out calls for applications, right? Typically, they are your government agencies, right? The U.S. government, Department of State, the British government through the Foreign Affairs and Commonwealth Office, Development Office, various governments through their embassies in a lot of instances will have those calls on their websites, where they publicly let you know that, look, they have funding available for certain things. These are their priorities when it comes to, development, cooperation, or technical assistance. And these are the pots of money that are available, right? And they'll usually list the criteria. Then you talk of your multilateral. Here, we're looking at the World Bank, or should I say the World Bank Group, because the World Bank Group itself has several actors. They have the IFC that will fund private companies directly. You have other members of the World Bank Group who typically focus on dealing with governments. And I think that's important for us to note. So there'll be a World Bank funded project, but typically the thing with multilateral organizations, your African development banks, your Islamic development banks, the World Bank Group, is that they, and even ECOWAS, the ECOWAS Development Bank, and most of the regional, sub-regional, multilaterals and development finance institutions, typically what will happen with them is they deal with governments. So it is very rare that you will find AFDB giving grants or funding opportunities directly to social enterprises or non-governmental organizations. Typically what they do is they will deal, there's a government agency that gets the funding, that gets responsibility for implementing a program, right? Like I said, there are exceptions, but in recent years, think in the last decade or so, there's been an increasing push towards having governments, building the capacity of government institutions, having governments take ownership and responsibility for coordinating any development activities going on in the sectors under their purview. And so, the Islamic Development Bank Group would give money to a BOI. They may deal with banks directly, right? But they're not going to, and then they'll sign, usually they'll sign agreements with the federal government of that country before they come in and start working. Then next we'll talk about foundations. And again, I've mentioned before your MacArthur's, your Ford's, the Gates Foundations. Now, these guys are the ones that, we're more likely to be dealing with a lot more directly, right? And before I forget, let me also mention that, there are more local, the Mo Ibrahim fellowships and so on. And then even far out in Asia, you have the Tata Foundation as well. So, these sort of organizations exist, and they are the ones who are, the ones that you can more often than not approach directly, strike up conversations with, and who will partner with you or will have funding, or in kind. If they're not bringing cash, they'll have in kind contributions to make. MTN, everywhere you go, there's the MTN Foundation as well. And again, it's a similar sort of thing with these types of funders. Then there's corporate CSR, not to be confused with our foundation. So here, this is where, think of MTN, the telco company itself, not its foundation, not its, charitable arm, right? Think of MTN, the company itself, and they they make a ton of money off of us, right? With all the airtime and the data, what we pay for these services. And typically built into their budgets is we do need to give back to society, not just because it's good, but also because it's good for the bottom line, right? It's part of PR, it's part of their strategy. And so there are funds, there's funding made available. And again, like your foundations, these ones you can approach, you can have conversations with, if what you're seeking to do aligns strongly enough with their strategy for the year, and will help the business bottom line. Then you'll be lucky, you'll be able to access those funds. And then last but not least, and typically this is a forgotten group, and possibly the group of funders that most of us understand the least are the philanthropists and high net worth individuals. So think about Dangote himself, or Otedola, or who else? Bill Gates, the individual, not the foundation. Think about late Herbert Wigwe. There are a few individuals who, aside from having foundations, are just on their own predisposed to being charitable, right? And giving funds. A friend of mine, and a colleague as well, actually shared with me recently that in her religious community, they were seeking to build a place of worship, and this wasn't even a fundraising event. This was a typical service, And in that service, between no more than 20 individuals, like payments that were made on the spot, they were able to raise 3 billion naira. Let's convert that, and we're talking about, we're talking of 2 million US dollars, right? If my math is right on this, we're talking of 2 million US dollars that were able to be raised, to build a place of worship. So I mean, and again, there is evidence that shows that philanthropists actually usually are found giving to their religious communities, to their traditional communities, right? So they'll help build roads, they'll help build schools, they'll do scholarships, they'll have health programs that, where the money goes directly, they can see where the money is going. But again, that's an untapped resource. I'm just thinking back to the module yesterday. That one is one that probably is the one that relies the most strongly on relationships, right? Within your circle, your network, your network of friends, are the people they also know. And it's also that thing of dealing with people just as human beings, right? So you're not dealing with these guys just because they have money in their pockets, but oftentimes the key to accessing them is through relationships, and then knowing that the funds they're giving you are going to be used for purpose. Because again, evidence has shown that that's one of the major obstacles to getting philanthropists, high net worth individuals to support a lot of organizations. So let me now take us through the grant making process. The grant making process usually follows these 5 steps. There's always a call for proposals. So that's one thing, I need all of us to know. Pretty much all these types of donors will have some public announcement. And usually what they will do is they will provide the criteria. They will tell you what they're looking for. They'll tell you the scope. I mean, quite a number of them during this period. I know at NYFF we do that. I know the US government used to do that. A lot of these guys will have information sessions. The idea is to give everyone as much information as possible so that you can submit the strongest application possible, right? And then, of course, there's the submission of the application itself for most now, there are digital platforms that are required, although sometimes it can be as simple as email. But very rarely is anyone asking you to provide, some of us remember back in days where they'll tell you send 10 hard copies of documents and supporting documents in your application. The world's moved on beyond that now, right? The next will be the stage of reviewing and shortlisting. So here they're checking, do you meet the basic requirements, right? And if you don't, then you get put in the reject pile. Organizations that have really, really strong in real-time communication platforms will be giving you your rejection notification almost immediately. But again, I can also tell you that sometimes organizations delay on that because again, they want to, there's a chance that maybe there can be some flexibility or something happens, which means that they can change the criteria, right, to include more people, or more funding might be available and they can include more. But typically, if you don't meet the minimum requirements, it's going to be a no. So if they tell you we're looking for young people between the ages of 18 and 35 and you're 40, and it's an individual grant or fellowship, I mean, you're going to get put in a pile. If it's location based and your organization or you as an individual is not based or operating in one of the locations that part of the geographical scope, again, you don't quite meet the criteria. So that sort of thing's going on. But in addition to that is also that they are, for those that do meet the criteria, they are now beginning to rank and score your application, right? So the fact that you meet the minimum requirement does not mean that you're necessarily going to get the grant. let me give you an example from NYFF. Our last grant cycle, we had we had about 10,000 individuals who started the process. We, in the end, 2,200 completed the applications process, but we only had enough funding for 101 grantees, right? 6 of those were Catalyst grantees, which meant they were going to take they could get up to 50,000 USD. About 50 of those were going to be our organizations, right? And then the rest of them were going to be individuals. So think about it. There's 2,200, and we were supposed to select 101. If you discount the guys who are not eligible, and let's say you have about 800 who meet who are eligible based on the basic criteria, you still need to be able to drill down to get to your final 101, right? So this is where things get really competitive. How well written your application is, how coherent, like the logic, the theory of change, your budgeting needs to be on point. Bonus points if you show that you are either innovating, right? Bringing something brand new, a new way to solve an old problem, or a new way of or a solution to an entirely new solution to a problem that nobody's been able to tackle, right? Or you're going into an underserved area and you've cracked a code or something for how that can be done. There's bonus points for that. Some of the things we're also looking for is how well do you know the issues and the work that's already been done. A lot of funders are big, and rightly so, on sustainability, which means that if someone else is already doing or has already done or found solutions to the problem, and you are proposing the same sort of solutions, so you may have a solid plan in place, but if it's already been done, if it's already being done, then chances are that you're not going to rank as strongly as someone who is bringing a new way to solve an old problem in a way that just blows things out of the water, right? Then the next steps are around due diligence. So this is where they're doing background checks. This is where things like your social media presence, right? How visible are you? There, and again, this is where I also need a lot of us to take note. And this is where relationships matter, right? In ways that we may not realize they do. Within the donor community, there's exchange of information, right? These guys meet up for coffee. They're a phone call or an email away from each other. They're in working groups. They even share lists of organizations that are blacklisted, those who have done work for them and who they would recommend. So we need to keep in mind that and particularly nowadays, we now live in a world where between AI and just a bit of good cyber forensics and digging, comments, public statements that we make, you get into a very nasty exchange of words or arguments with someone on a social media platform. Those kind of things can come back to bite us, right? Or you are supposed to be working on issues to do with inclusion, or even not, right? But you do make a statement that is anything but in support of inclusion, and you do that on a public platform. It's even things like your private life. I don't know if any of us have been following on social media. There's a company CEO who basically, publicly has been caught having an affair with his HR manager. He's married, right? And that sort of thing. So someone will say that has nothing to do with the work. But again, character, integrity, these are things that matter to a lot of donors. If you can't be faithful in your relationships, if you treat your employees horribly, if you've broken agreements in the past, you were supposed to submit reports to another funder, and you didn't, or you cheated in an exam, or you did something that wasn't quite honest, and there's a record for that, and you haven't moved on and obviously grown past that, because again, there's also room for second chances. Those kind of things can come back to bite you, right? I'm sure many of us know it's now part of visa considerations. There are employers who will do background checks on you on social media before even hiring staff these days. So we need to be careful between your references, which they will check, but then all the other stuff that your organization does, and that the individuals in high level individuals in your organization stand for, and what they're associated with. Even things like, does your organization have a governance structure? Do you guys do your audits? Do you file reports? They will check for all those sorts of things. Then last but not least will now be the stage of grant awarding and reporting. So here, agreements will be signed. Some donors will give you, and it will give you money in tranches. Some will give you all the money up front. Again, it depends, right? And it will come down to how well your negotiation with them, right? So a lot of folks don't realize this, that you can negotiate. You have submitted an application earlier on, but there's still some room for negotiation on terms at this stage. And then of course you get on to execute, and you should be submitting your financial reports, your narrative reports, where you tell them, you give them updates on progress, on results. You can also expect they will come and there will be audits, there will be evaluations, impact evaluations, right? So now, what are donors looking for? What are their criteria? What are the priorities for them? Everything based on my years of experience, and even now as someone who's in the last few projects I've worked on, has had responsibility for grant management and decision making, will tell you that a lot of these are tied to these four things. I'm going to start with mission alignment, right? So you submit a proposal to, let's say, a grants foundation, and you want them to fund. You want them to fund something around. Let me use civic engagement, right? Brilliant proposal, clear theory of change, logic frame is on point. Like your budget, you've gone and you've done your survey, everything's on point, a beautiful, you even have your work plan all worked out. There's one problem. The Gates Foundation, in terms of its priorities, if you check its website, is focused on livelihoods, health, and particularly issues to do with women nutrition, right? So you can't be approaching a Gates Foundation with a proposal that doesn't align with your mission. So that's where you already start getting into problems. So mission alignment is very important. When they receive your application or a discussion around collaborations or partnerships, the first thing anybody should be thinking about, and even for those of us who are approaching them, the first thing we should be thinking about is, what do they stand to get out of this, right? So I know what I want, you know what you want, but what do they get out of this? What are they trying to achieve? Most of these organizations will publicly come out. Their strategy documents are out in public. So it does mean that there's a bit of research we each need to do before you approach, so you know who to approach and what you're approaching them about, right? You may be able to get some funding if you're doing something that is an intersection between maternal and child nutrition, and maybe civic engagement. You might be able to get them to support if you can make a strong enough case around where where there are results that they would be interested in. So that's one. Next thing is impact potential. So you submit a proposal, but your proposal is looking to address issues in one community, right? One local government. I mean, if it's a large enough community, maybe it's going to impact the lives of 5,000 people, right? And that's me being generous. You have a community of 5,000 people, and you're asking for, you have a solution that costs $5,000. Then there's someone else who has, who is asking for the same $5,000, but they're going to address the same issues, and they're going to be able to, and they have demonstrated that they're going to be able to have impact on double that number, right? And your proposal is looking to address issues maybe around health. But the other person's proposal is able to show that not only are we going to be able to address health outcomes, get positive outcomes for health, we're also going to be able to help address other issues around maybe kids being out of school, jobs created, livelihoods. And so the same $5,000, I mean, think about it. If I'm an investor and my 5,000 can get me 10 things versus 2 things, I would probably spend my money on 10 of the same thing, right? And so that's how those who are reviewing the applications, that's what's going through their head. Can this money that this individual is asking for, do more? Can we do more with this money than what they're proposing? So you may have a nice idea. It may be something that's workable, but if it's not something that has that potential for impact or scalability, right? So we give you $5,000, but in a year's time, that $5,000 can grow into something, where you can generate 10,000, or if we give you 10,000, you can do even more of the same thing. They look out for things like that. Then I'm going to speak to governance and accountability. So this year now we're talking of structures, right? So, and I know, and this one's a particularly important point for us in Africa. I mean, I would say Nigeria, but again, the statistics, the data shows that this is across the board in the continent. 60 in some countries, as much as 90% of the economy is informal. So it doesn't mean people aren't active. It doesn't mean people aren't engaged, and doing being productive. But it does mean that they are not formally recognized as organizations, right? So that's one aspect of the problem. But again, even for organizations that are registered, your corporate affairs commission, whatever equivalent of it exists in your country, you're registered. But in terms of, for instance, you have an advisory board. You have, for private companies, they would have an executive board, right? Shareholders, directors, that sort of thing. In nonprofits, in social enterprises, and in organizations that are, working on development issues, typically there is supposed to be an advisory board. They are not, most times they're not part of the day-to-day running and operations, but they're there to make sure that, operations runs as it should, in terms of strategic direction, in terms of compliance, and even just in terms of knowledge and expertise of what's going on in the ecosystem. They're there to provide that sort of guidance. Does your organization, do you guys do audits? Do you do financial reporting? Do you pay your taxes? Are you registered to pay tax? Do you comply with statutory requirements, right? As per the rules of your country. If you struggle with those things, then it's even also things like, do you have the staff, the ability to do what it is you say you want to do, right? If you don't, then you're going to struggle a lot with getting funding. Because again, I will say it, even as individuals, someone comes up to you, oh, please give me, I need this money, I'm going to do this stuff, I need to do this. You will check for, okay, is this someone that, can be held accountable just in case? Is this someone who, has the ability to properly manage the funds that, is going to be given to them? Or are we going to struggle, right? So yes, in the development space, oftentimes the funding that's given, no one's expecting you to pay back, right? But the funds still need to be used properly, efficiently, and the way they are intended for, right? And structures need to be in place to have those sort of checks and balances. Then last but not least is sustainability, right? Again, that question of there's a problem you want to solve, you ask for money, but the truth of it is you are not demonstrating in your proposal that you're already thinking of the next steps, right? So if you give me this funding, I implement the solution, I get this problem solved, I am going to set up, as we are running that project, a lot of the things we're doing is designed to set up a mechanism that means that the results outlive this initiative, just in case we can't get additional funding. So sustainability isn't, oh, what's the next thing? How do we set this thing up so that I keep getting funding? Let me let you in on a little secret. Development is, the view around development is, we are only having to do this because societies aren't quite where they need to be. But the end goal really is, that a time comes where we don't need, we don't, the role of non-governmental organizations changes, right? Our government institutions are strong enough, they have the capacity, they can do for the most part, most of the things they need to do, right? Which is why most development initiatives are time-bound. They're always projects or programs with, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year lifespans, right? They're not designed. Even embassies, never quite. They don't buy land and build and establish themselves. Most governments are there on the, goodwill and behest of other governments. So again, I need us to get that. So the person who's looking at your application is asking themselves, what is proposed here? Is it something that if there is no way to fund it after we've done this initiative, we can still come back in 5 years, we can come back in 3 years, and we can still see the results. We can still see the impact of what's been done here. So again, that's something for us to all think about. Now, let's talk about trends. I'm mindful of time, so I'm gonna, I may not spend as much time speaking to each of these points as maybe, I would have under normal circumstances. But the trends, I'm sure many of us beginning of the year would have heard of the US government's decision. The current administration in the US has decided to take a very different approach to development funding. There's no USAID any longer. A lot of the calls for applications this year didn't quite go, or rather for next year, didn't come out as they should have, because the US government has, changed its priorities, changed the way it's going to do, development cooperation, right? But then one very interesting thing, again, I want everyone to take note of is it's not just the US government. Many governments that are huge donors, have scaled back, right? It's tough everywhere. And so we don't have as much money to give towards, development cooperation as we would, we typically would have done. But another thing that I want us all to pay attention to is, before, what most of us would have been used to seeing, maybe prior to 2020, was that in most of our countries, you would see a lot of expats, a lot of international development expats. I would really love, this isn't Zoom, but I'd love in the chat, in the comment section, you guys put in there either agreeing or disagreeing with me. In the last 5 years, you would have noticed that there are fewer and fewer of foreign experts working on development issues. Yes or no? I mean, in Nigeria, that's certainly been the case. So there's the trend towards local ownership. So remember what I said about the multilaterals dealing with government agencies, less and less with you directly, right? Or less and less with an INGO, you know, where they would give a Palladium, you know, a Tetra Tech funds to come and manage the development initiative. There's less and less of that now. They're dealing with government agencies. And for foundations, they are dealing more and more with the local NGOs with operating in those countries. What that does mean is that there's opportunity for us, especially if we're willing to step up and address some of those 4 points I raised in the last slide. Another trend, and I'm sure everybody has talked onto this, is that many of the donors are looking to support digital transformation. So technology, digital technology in particular, has enormous potential for scale, right? You spend a bit of money, you come up with a solution, and everyone across the country, everyone even across, you know, international borders can be part of something, right? Technology allows for that, and now we have AI that's come on board with all the potential that it also brings, right? So there's been a shift towards really supporting digital transformation, where there are opportunities for it to help solve problems, especially at local level, and where AI can be brought to bear in that solution is something that donors are particularly excited about funding. Climate focus, right? Climate change is still a very real and present concern. The US government has pulled out of the compact, so they're going to be funding that less and less. Or rather, they're not providing funding, as much funding to climate change initiatives, but it's still an ongoing focus, right? So for those of us who work on those issues, there's still funding available. Then again, there is, and it has come to stay, right? This priority around inclusion, right? Particularly around gender, equity, persons living with disabilities, and all forms of social inclusion. So as you are preparing your proposals, you must show in your planning, in your targeting, that you are looking to address inequalities, inequities across, you know, the spectrum as relative to your local context, right? Women account for about 50% of the population across the continent. But when we look at the opportunities they have, you know, and just structural issues, they seem to, you know, be the ones bearing the brunt. So there's a lot of funding available to try and address those inequalities. Persons living with disabilities across the board are generally about 5% of the population. But again, they are members of our you know, communities. And if our societies can work for them, it should be able to work for anybody, right? And then social inclusion, as it has to do with your rural, urban populations, those of us who have had access to education, those of us who may not have had access to education. As we think around solutions, we need to be thinking about how to, you know, bridge the gap, particularly keeping underserved, marginalized populations and communities at the heart of those solutions. And then, of course, youth leadership development. The African population is 60 to 70%, you know, individuals aged under the age of 40. The average African is 20 years old, if you're looking at age, right? But then again, there are inequalities, there's inequities. If you look at the resources, if you look at opportunities, if you look at those who are making decisions, The average age of political leaders on the continent is 63, right? And we're saying that the average age of an African is 20. So there's a problem there, right? And there's a lot of work and a lot of funding available to address, this aspect of, giving young people access to resources, giving them access to opportunities, so that they can take, play leadership roles, and even be able to aspire to leadership in whether it's industry, politics, and what have you. And thankfully, I mean, we're having a lot of success stories on that front. So challenges. Challenges for many of us, if we were asked. Here, the challenges we're talking about are more in terms of us being able to access funding. So one of the perhaps things that we don't always think about is donor fatigue. And this is now us trying to empathize and put ourselves in the shoes of our donors, right? There's limited funding, even if you're a big foundation or you're a multilateral or bilateral agency, right? Even if you have a lot of money, there are a lot of issues that need addressing. There are a lot of actors that are who are seeking partnerships and funding. And so donors themselves, I mean, as we have seen early this year, we've seen instances where countries are even saying, you know what, we're going to pull back a bit, right? So that's a challenge, right? And that is something we need to be careful about. So as you are looking for how to get funding and opportunities, we need to start thinking about, okay, I'm not just approaching them because of something that I need. I also need to be thinking about what they need. How do I make this a win-win? What value do I bring to the table, right? And then for those of us who are seeking funding, there's the one recurring theme is that a lot of us complain that we think that the process for applying and securing funds is very complex, right? You'll apply for a grant or a fellowship. They'll require that you do a course. Then, after you pass that course, you need to do an application, a business plan, or another proposal. And even after that, you may still not be successful, right? And the process itself just feels, the documents they're asking for, the things they're asking for seem like they're, asking for a lot and from much, so much from you. Again, the only thing I would, my response to that is, I do know that in the donor community, there's that constant conversation of, okay, how do we make things as simple as possible? But at the same time, there are certain standards and principles that are non-negotiable. So think back to the 4 points I mentioned around, skill for potential for impact, sustainability, your governance structure, your governance and accountability structures, and alignment with mission, right? Those are non-negotiable. And to be able to get evidence of that, there are questions that are essential. You must be able to demonstrate that you are a form of, like, you're an existing entity, and that you do have what it takes to be able to meet, the reporting requirements and to execute, the projects that you are supposed to in compliance with best practice, right? So for organizations, there's that bit of work that we need to do to be able to, address that problem. And then last but not least is the challenge around competition. We really can't get away from the fact that, even when there's a big pool of money, there's always a larger demand, than the supply of funding that exists. And so those are challenges that have always existed, but now more than ever. And then what are the opportunities? So, that's the thing. There's good news here. Everything's not black and all about doom and gloom. But what I will say is, and I'm wrapping up now. I'm coming to the end of my presentation. There are opportunities that exist around partnerships, right? So I will start with the last challenge around competition. I want funding to do what I think I should do. I have people who I'm hiring. I have a way I think is the best way that things need to be done. But then there are 5 or 6 other organizations that are thinking exactly the same way and who similarly want to do the same sort of thing. So maybe instead of competing, we should be looking at alliances. We can borrow a bit from private sector and even have mergers, right? So you can do your joint ventures where you stay as separate entities, or you can decide that, you know what, hang on, between your organization and my organization, you guys are stronger on certain fronts, we not so much. So you know what, instead of competing separately, let's even come together and form an entirely, one organization, right? And pool on our resources and our strengths. So that way we have less competition, more collaboration, right? And funders love to see that stuff. They love to see where you're leveraging off of either work that someone else has done, or where you present to them a consortium where we are strong on this, these guys are strong on this, these guys are strong on this. So they have the structure to manage the funds. We have the local expertise to be able to go and deal with underserved communities. We have the linkages with policymakers, and across the 3 of us, I mean, hypothetically, you give us this money, we can get it done, right? So that's always going to be more appealing than and it addresses the issue of competition. It's hard to do, but it's certainly something that should be done. Another opportunity lies and exists around research, right? There's always, and this is for us to do, as you seek for funding, as you seek for partnerships, there's, again, thank God for technology. There's opportunity for us to, a bit of research, a bit of learning, a bit of, okay, let me think out of the box, is an opportunity for each and every one of us. You want to approach a Gates Foundation, do your homework on Gates Foundation. You want to approach, you're looking for funders who are aligned with what you're looking for. That's research that you need to do. Those are relationships that you need to seek to build, right? And then last but not least, believe it or not, although this has been mentioned already, is technology. The technology innovations, let me even speak more broadly. There are opportunities, particularly when we're looking at new ways of addressing old problems. There are certain gaps, and we're able to identify ways to address those gaps, right, that have not been done before. Those are where the opportunities lie. Then last but not least, very important, storytelling. A lot of remember what I said about the due diligence stage. Part of what organizations who are looking to give you money will also be checking is how well are these guys, how visible are these guys, how visible is their work, how visible are the players, right? So you may be in your corner and you are doing what you're doing, and you have impact, but are you capturing those stories? Are you amplifying those stories? An organization that wants to get funding and that has the work that they do and the results of the work that they do very visible, are telling stories that resonate with donors, are the ones who are most likely to, even sometimes donors will reach out to you and tell you, look, there's this work we need to get done. Can we have a conversation? So when you're visible, you have less chasing to do a lot of times, less explaining to do, because the evidence, I mean, the proof of your work is there for anyone to see. So yeah, I'm going to conclude on that note. Really just to say that there are opportunities. I know it can seem very difficult. It can seem very daunting. But between, working hard to get the knowledge that we need, pursuing partnerships, really thinking very critically about what problems we're solving, and how we can innovatively solve those problems. We should have an easier time finding partners, finding funders, people who are willing to invest, their finances in supporting the work that we do. At this point, I'm handing over to everyone for their questions, for their comments, for the further discussions that we'll have afterwards.
So the first question, all right, it says, how important is an organization's digital footprint and public reputation, e.g. on social media, in donor diligence today? All right, ma'am.
Important. It is very important. In today's world, in fact, let me put it this way: in today's world, the fact that absence on digital platforms. I mean, you may not necessarily have a website, right? Although websites, believe it or not, are not very expensive to have and set up. But even if you are not at that point on having a website, a LinkedIn page, an Instagram page, a Facebook page, you get you do need to have presence online. In fact, I will even go as far as telling you that not even having any kind of presence would work against you. It's a bit of a red flag. So it's very, very important. And then there's you being there in the first place. Then there's also the kind of things we catch you doing. I'll say it again. You as an individual, or a member of your staff goes and is busy fighting and quarreling and insulting people, in social media discussions, on online discussions. Those things, there are organizations that have fired staff because of that sort of thing. So, it is very important. Donors, I can tell you that we look out for things like that when we're assessing our applicants. For someone who was a bit careless in their past. So you guys are lucky you have me here, because apart from my work in development, I also have communications expertise. So let me give you advice. This is now strategic comms. Go back and do an audit of your past, your pages. You can set for yourself the same way a donor would go and type your name and your name would come up. So do an audit. Thank God, there are things you can delete. There are things you can, I kid you not. If those do not reflect who you are now, you either delete them or you take the time today to come up and put content that says, can you imagine, once upon a time, this was me. I thought this way. I would engage this way. Thank God for growth. Now I know better. I cringe. You get what I mean? There must be something. The same platform that you went, the same way you visibly committed that atrocity. Now you've identified it. You either, take it down, or better yet, right? You come up and you create content that speaks to that. You're not running away from it, but you are now letting everybody know that that person isn't you anymore. You've learned, you've moved past that, and so that's again, donors. Remember, the issue is not, nobody is a saint, right? But the ability to demonstrate growth, the ability, because again, donors also expect that while you are implementing your project, you may go to field and find that the realities are a bit different. A COVID comes up and you're not able to quite do things the way you were initially supposed to. Are you able to learn? Are you able to say, okay, we didn't quite anticipate this, we got this wrong in our planning, and then adjust, account for that, and move on? So again, that would be my advice for someone who has been a bit careless in the past, and then commit to being better going forward.
All right. Thank you so much, Doctor. This one says, what are the top mistakes applicants make during the call for proposal stage that instantly alter their chances?
Okay. So for me, one of the most obvious things is you submit an application where you do not meet the bare basic requirements, right? you are hoping that, or maybe they just, I mean, that's one thing I've always seen, and I've always wondered what's behind it, right? You know that you don't meet the requirements, but maybe, again, you either think they are not going to do proper checks, or you think that the criteria doesn't matter, right? So you submit an application that you had no business submitting in the first place. You will get, I mean, nobody's going to respond to that. Then another mistake that I see that a lot of folks do is they don't take their time to do their research and their homework. One of the first things that we look for when we're looking at your application is, okay, does this person properly understand the problem, the context of the problem, the approaches? You get what I mean? Do they understand, for us as an organization, what, we are based on public information that we put out there, by the way? Do they show that they've taken the time to really, really understand this thing before putting in this proposal? And we're looking for that in your problem statement. You have to be able to tell us what the problem is. You have to be able to tell us that, show us that you are aware of the efforts that have been made, and what grounds may have been covered. If you don't do that in your proposal, it's a major thing, that will get you discounted. There are some other things that you do. Maybe your budgeting, we can work with you to fix the budgeting. If the logic, right, and if your understanding of the problem and then the solution you are proposing, at high level, is something that we can see that is effective. Some of those other smaller things can be worked out. But if you miss those 3-4 things I just mentioned, it hurts your application. And last but not least, nobody likes to hear this, but your proposal should be properly written. Typographical errors, grammatical errors, punctuation, layout, format. Yes, you'll be shocked. You receive applications that are painful and difficult to read. No matter how brilliant the idea is, if it's not properly written, remember again that there are thousands of other applicants. So if, as brilliant as your proposal might be, I can put it aside and know that I'm still likely to find a very, very good one. So if you need to get someone to help you edit, review the work, sort out those things, it's worth it, honestly. So that would be my response to that question. I forgot the proposal itself. Some of us start reaching out directly to the teams and start, talking to colleagues, talking to people within the organization. And the teams that handle the selection process, we find out about those things, and then we've taken notes of your application. There's nothing wrong with trying to, understand the process and what's required. But then if you are engaging in, activities that suggest that you are trying to bias or influence the process in your favor, that counts against you, actually. So there's nothing wrong with reaching out to say, can I get more information? Can I get clarity on the process? That you have every right to do. In fact, when you do that, you even show us where there may be gaps in how we've communicated, and we can fix it for everybody. But if you are trying to manipulate the process, that's an integrity issue, and it could even get you blacklisted. So let's be careful.
All right, this question is from Sebastian. It says, what are the steps we can take to make a case for urgency in our proposals?
Okay, so Sebastian, thank you for that question. Now, the truth of it is that most organizations have a grant cycle, right? So let me give you NYFF, for instance. The 2025 grant cycle started in November last year. That was even a bit late. Typically, it should have started maybe in September or October, so that by the time we get to the end of the year, we have done the selection process and then we have signed contracts, we've awarded grants. Then we come into 2025, and its implementation and monitoring, report writing, storytelling, and then we now, start the next grant cycle. So when we talk, for structured grants, you cannot, how do I put this? There's a window, there's a length of time that it takes. Typically, unless there are special circumstances or challenges, typically a structured grant application takes between 3 to 6 months, in all honesty. So what it means is that you as an organization, as you are planning, you also need to get into that mindset of planning, right? You need funds to carry out certain activities in 2026. It's not in 2026 or in the last, for most organizations, the last quarter of the year, they've already kickstarted. So it's for us to be paying attention. And again, this is where research comes in, so that you are not coming to request for funding when we have already, we're at a point in the process. That said, organizations, certainly on NYFF, for instance, we have what we call an agile fund. So that's unstructured. You can request for that at any point in the year. But the caveat is that the thing you're asking for that money for, and it's small money compared to what we give in the structured grants. The idea behind that is something came up suddenly that nobody could have planned for during the course of the year, and that there's now this really urgent need for money. And even that takes maybe about a month to 2 months with us trying to fast track the process, because we have our own internal screening mechanisms as well. So, you are talking of communicating the urgency. Typically, the donor that you are reaching out to already kind of has a sense. They know when something's urgent, when it's not. And I can tell you for free, they try and fast track the process. But again, it's also, the onus is also on those of us applying to try and understand what their calendar looks like. The calendar is different for different organizations. So let me leave it at this point.
All right, so we have this will be the last question. Actually, we have a lot of questions, so we'll take this last one. It says, how can grassroots organizations demonstrate strong governance and accountability structures, even with limited resources?
This is a great question. So first of all, I always like to challenge stereotypes. So first of all, those of us that are in grassroots organizations don't have a tougher time than those of us that are in urban centers. I can tell you that for free, right? So that's number one. That said, I know that if you are a grassroots organization, typically you are not living in an urban center, right? So that means the social amenities that may be available. In a country like Nigeria, there are communities where there's no electricity supply, there's no telecommunications supply, there are no roads. To travel from one local government to another one is a day's journey. I'm not exaggerating, right? So we know that there are those challenges. What I will tell everybody, and this is the how do I put this? For a grassroots organization, even if you don't have the resources to use Excel, or you don't have laptops, you don't have all those sorts of things available, I can tell you honestly that and I'll use an example on NYFF. Our applications are typically submitted on digital platforms, but in our first cycle, we had an applicant, a successful applicant, by the way. And this was an organization, an individual grantee, right, who applied for grants, who applied for an individual grant, and he submitted his application in writing. So he took note of the questions, right? His own case was that he didn't even have the skills to engage with the form, but he took note of the questions, what was required, and to the best of his ability, still answered the questions, reached out to us, found a way to reach out to the team, and we said, you know what, we're going to look at this on based on its own special circumstances. The fact that he even went the extra mile, and was ready to say, because again, for us at NYFF, the idea is that we're trying to groom the next generation of activists. And that means you meet them where they are. If people's hearts are in the right place, so this is another thing, right? For us at NYFF, we have the luxury of saying, okay, this person's heart is in the right place. We will mentor, we will coach you, we will guide you, we will teach you what to do, right? But for the rest of us that are here, I always tell folks, it's some things that are just basic common sense. Your finances, right? Have a notebook, note them down, keep receipts where receipts are available. Have somebody, many of us, even when we live in the grassroots, we understand the concept of you have a president, you have a secretary, you have a treasurer. Even if it's as basic as that, what you are doing is putting in place a kind of structure that works. Again, I will tell you, a lot of donors their hearts burst and they're excited to see instances where, okay, for us traditionally, what you do is you have a chairman of the board, you have this. For these guys, because they are committed to accountability and having a governance structure where decision making is properly done, what they've done is, even with their limited resources, they found a fix. If you can demonstrate your ability to use those limited resources to have an accountability and governance structure and do the little that you can, then of course you can be trusted with even more. We will now understand that, okay, as we expose you to better practices, give you more resources, you will be able to handle those and you will grow. That's the objective. So I hope, Sebastian, that has been able to answer your question to a good extent.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elisabeth, for such a thought-provoking and power-packed session. You've not only helped us understand the funding landscape more clearly, but you have also challenged us, to think differently, all right, to align, to prepare, to be visible, and to lead with strategy. So on behalf of everyone at the Further Firm and on behalf of all our African change makers, all right, you want to say something?
Sorry, please, Mr. Femi. There's a question I've just seen in chat from Asaga Ayo. As someone who has served as a grant reviewer and on a selection team, can you explain why grant funders often find it challenging to provide individual feedback to applicants? I believe that personalized reviewer feedback can help applicants learn and improve future proposals. Asaga, you are right. And I'll be the first to admit and say that, again, so first of all, I need you to understand that first of all, you're talking about instances where there are hundreds, thousands. And then I need you guys to understand that the team doing the reviews, if you are lucky, you have 10 people assigned to doing the reviews. Exactly. So that said, he's not wrong, because I can tell you that for us at NYFF and a few other grants funding organizations, it's a conversation we've been having. The good news is that technology can help address this problem, right? So again, the onus is on us, and believe it or not, is for us to now say, okay, we're going to find funding, or we're going to build grant management systems that mean that each reviewer provides comments, and then you, the applicant, you are able to log in. You can see your score. You can see, their assessment, their appraisal of your application. So that's something that is doable. That's a lesson for us. But I'll be honest with you, if it's, they receive your applications with and another thing I need us to understand too is that this is where that trade-off of we're trying to keep the process as simple as possible versus being able to do everything, like provide feedback, comes in. having a system that allows us to do that is something that you need to build. It takes money, right? And it may not, and you don't have systems like that that are just available everywhere. So it's that trade-off. But Asaga, you've hit on a very important point there. But what I will tell everybody is that the truth of it is, until it gets to a point where funding organizations can put those kind of systems in place, it's going to be very difficult. If you send an email and they schedule a call with you, are they going to now schedule a call with everybody else that was rejected? The time, the resources are simply not going to be there. But yeah, if we can apply technology to solve the problem, maybe that's a way forward. But thank you very much for that question. It's a very valid, important one, and I felt I had to take it.
All right. Thank you, Matt. So on behalf of everyone, we want to say we are grateful for your time, your insights, and the depth of experience you brought into this space today. So thank you once again for lending your voice to this journey, and we are better for it. All right. Thank you so much, Matt. All right. We are almost running up. Our time is well spent. So I want to encourage everyone here. Of course, is one thing to to attend a powerful session like this, but it is another to take what you've learned into action. So whether she has talked a lot, she said a lot of things actually. So whether it's refining your funding strategy, rethinking your approach to donor engagement, or even becoming more intentional about your visibility and your storytelling, my advice is start small. All right, but start now. I will repeat that: start small. All right, but start now. So the difference between insight and impact actually is implementation. Okay, and don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn. That is where it is happening. All right, that is where we are giving out a lot of information on LinkedIn. In fact, we have other programs coming up. So when you follow us, it's you have all those information at your doorstep. I'm going to be running up here, but the stream won't end. You know us already, the way we do it. Admin, give us our theme song.
Ladies and gentlemen, across Africa and beyond, this one is for the visionaries, the builders, the change makers. Welcome to the funding forum.
From Lagos to Nairobi, Accra to Kigali, we gather to unlock destiny. No more guessing, we got the key. The further from they show the strategy. Grants, donations, corporate giving, everything we need, we go start winning. Proposal came, now we did deliver, because we understand the funding formula.